In the clips you're about to watch, we're discussing efforts by large marketing associations, think tanks, and some very large tech companies to stop the government efforts from actually giving individuals rights over their private information. They want to leave everything as is, basically granting rights directly to industry association to self-regulate their own members. And this is kind of the battle that's going on. This was something that was posted by the National Telecommunication and Information Administration. The NTIA is an agency within the Department of Commerce, and its job is basically to inform and advise the president about policies, specifically about certain policies involving technology and freedom of information. NTIA is seeking comments and recommendation from all interested stakeholders on its international internet policy priorities. So NTIA wants to collect information from people that are interested. Obviously, who's going to come to the table with opinions? Companies that have a stake in it. Usually, individuals don't write letters to the Department of Commerce expressing their opinion. Usually, it's people with a great deal of interest and a great deal at stake here. So it's going to be companies, and a lot of time it's associations. Some companies don't like to be public in their lobbying effort, because this is what it is. This is just a lobbying effort, basically trying to influence government policy. So they don't want to be out there and don't want to put their name across. So what they do is they donate money through different industry associations. So the industry associations speak on their behalf here. The NTIA is an executive branch agency responsible for advising the president on telecommunication and information policy. In the 40 years since its inception, NTIA has made growth and innovation in communication technology, most recently internet communication, a cornerstone of its mission. A lot of time our government, it has nothing to do with this administration, just the way our government works. One agency doesn't speak to another. One has a goal which doesn't impact another. So you get, the NTIA pushing for international growth through freedom of data, while at the same time you have a different agency, the FTC, trying to encourage laws and behavior that protect consumer privacy, and they don't really get balanced on a policy level. Basically, two agencies that go off on their own, trying to kind of fight their own battles. Through this notice, NTIA is soliciting comments and recommendation from stakeholders in the international internet policy priorities. The comments they got back, and I'm going to show you this, probably maybe 36 different letters from different large tech companies, your Google, your Verizon, your AT&T, but also from large associations, usually different marketing associations or different associations representing technology companies. And there's also some from kind of think tanks. And we'll go over that. There's some interesting one from a libertarian think tank and how they're approaching some of this idea. But in all, the vast majority of this believe in one concept, which is that the model that we've developed to date is basically the only right model, and they want no change. And what is that model? We talked about many, many times before, is that when it comes to privacy, when it comes to regulation over data, that basically it's going to be the industry associations through self-regulation. They're going to control what is okay. The government is going to set up very, very sort of high-level ideas of how data should be handled. For instance, that people should have notice, that people should be permitted to opt out of something that they don't want to, that in the event there's a breach, there's information being sent. Very sort of high-level kind of principles. But how they meet those principles will not be determined by the government or not be regulated by the government, but rather is going to be determined through best practices as determined by the industry. So it's these large tech companies, through their donations to their own associations, and they usually are members of dozens of different associations, that they then determine what kind of rules govern them, and then they try to meet that, which lead us to which is basically what we've had. This is a policy. This is the kind of strategy that we've had. They were first set up by President Clinton. So this is talking about the early to mid 1990s. The idea was that it's governed by the stakeholders. The government has a space to it, but it's not heavily regulated. And the reason why that was done is because it was a brand new industry, right? It basically, Nobody knew how to regulate the internet. Nobody knew what's going to turn into. It was absolutely brand new. So the idea is, okay, we'll do as little as possible, allow the industry to do that. You have to understand, it's kind of remarkable that this was actually the approach of the Democratic Party in the 1990s, to be kind of laissez-faire and not actually regulate this new industry out of existence here. So what I'm going to show you here is one of the letters from the Washington think tank. Let's take a look at this particular letter, because I wanted you to understand to what extreme some of these companies and industry association and think tanks are going in their analysis of what they're saying here. One of the primary challenges to the continued free flow of information and speech online is the potential for a control-driven model of global internet governance to supplement the existing American-inspired order. Right away, you're going to get just what's going to happen here. They're going to say that what we have, this is inspired. This is the American model. And virtually everything else is just un-American. National laws and regulations promulgated by countries around the world could potentially impede cross-border information flows to a significant detriment of not only U.S. companies and private sectors, but free expression and human rights. And I don't argue that. Yes, if every country has its own set of laws and they're all different, that could hinder the ability for people to properly express themselves. It will create kind of silos around nations. So we saw that with some of the argument against copyright issues within and the link tax in Europe, that it can actually prevent European residents from gaining access to information that the rest of the world will have about their own economies, their own governments, their own markets. As we stand at a historic crossroad in global internet governance policy, the road we're currently on has seen the flourishing of digital communication over the past quarter century. Turning off this road would lead us toward a theory of internet governance that is inherently antithetical to those American values. The core vision of this alternative path, as articulated by Chinese President Xi Jinping in a speech on April 20th, is a government-dictated command and control system of governance. Don't kid yourself. They are going to attack the GDPR, but they're going from the beautiful shining city on the hill, the American vision. I mean, you have to give some credit to the people that are paid to write this. This is the American vision of multi-stakeholder approach to governance, which basically means industry control, not government control. And the opposite of it is the Chinese government dictatorial. That's what they're saying. Basically, government dictated governance. Kant Clanseth, we are concerned about our privacy. The policy that was presented by President Clinton was done so because this was an industry in its absolute infancy. No one had any idea where this is going, right? What would the internet look like? Is that where we are today? Now, we can always say that about every single industry. We don't know where the agricultural combines are going to be in 10 years from now. True, I don't know where automobiles will be in 10 years from now. 10 years ago, who anticipated Tesla and all the electric cars? Well, some probably did. But nonetheless, the fact that we can't always anticipate the future does not mean that we never graduate from the point of saying this is an infant industry and we shouldn't touch it at all. At some point, we can say that we have learned enough out of the past 10 years. We kept kind of a laissez-faire attitude over the industry that allowed it to grow, and we've learned in the process that we may need some control over certain aspects so that while we are allowing for as much unfettered growth as possible, we are also minimizing damage that is difficult to reverse, like the loss of data, the sharing en masse, and the accumulation en masse of private information in databases that not only it can be a real threat, it's hard to overturn if it's breached by some nefarious players, but just the fact that these industries have this kind of enormous information about you that they've accumulated online that they can deploy, and you have zero access to it. You have no idea what people know about you. You have no control over what they do with the information. You barely knew that it was being collected and then being sold for profit and being shared online. So there has to be this kind of a balance, in my opinion. It doesn't mean that we have to go in one direction or another and just impose complete government control over information and write down laws in such a way that there's only one way for companies to comply. They have to do X, Y, and Z, or they don't comply. But there has to be some sort of a balance that will actually favor growth while still allowing us to react to what we have learned over the last 10, 15 years while we have let an industry grow basically unfeathered without any real government intervention. The 3D video. Wouldn't a GDPR-like law prevent websites from denying people access to content if they don't agree to tracking ads? That's part of what the argument here is. And many companies here have argued it in all their letters lobbying the government for it, saying that if we are pro freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, if we want to make sure that information is shared across the population with as much access as possible, want to make sure that people with less means still have access to information, we don't want to adopt a GDPR style law because this can be the impact, right? A website says, look, we need that information, and if you are not going to grant it to us, we are not going to give you access to it. As a result, people are then excluded and provided less access to information. That's true. I mean, there's no argument with that. The issue is that bad? If we say that above all else we cherish the free flow of information and everything else is secondary, then you can say, you know what, giving up some privacy right is okay because we want, let's say, a better educated population, a population that has access to a greater breadth of information, be a little more cosmopolitans, understand issues more. Then that could be your opinion about it. But I'm not sure if that necessarily is, the only choice out there. What if companies created, and I forgot, one of you actually put it on as one of the Twitter responses, and apologize, I forgot your call name in your Twitter response. But what if companies actually start realizing that, look, information has value. How about if we price it properly? How about if we say that if you want full access to this website, you're providing us with all that information, but complete disclosures, you know exactly what you're doing. And if you want to maintain control over your data, maybe either we give you less access or we then price it. So you get some for free and then the rest you pay for it. So you pay for the privilege of not providing us with the information that we feel is imperative. And for those who want complete anonymity, by all means, either don't have access to the website or pass a complete fee that basically recompensate us, because we're building a platform that relies on information. So if we're not going to make money off of the information, you've got to pay for that services. And I'm not sure if that's a bad approach, really. If companies, again, that's less regulation. I don't need the government to say you have to do X, Y, and Z. But what if there was complete disclosure of everything, which point companies would provide kind of like price differences depending on what kind of access we want to, and then it's up to us to make informed decision. The 3D video. The GDPR goes too far and disallows webmasters from blocking people who refuse tracking ads when non-tracking ad rates are crap, often less than 20 cents CPM. I'm not advocating for GDPR for the United States. I'm advocating for some of the concept that I think the GDPR got right. I think the recognition that we own our own data, that when Facebook collects information about us, it's not their information. Effectively, consider it our intellectual property. Our information is our own intellectual property, and when we give it to Facebook, it's subject to some sort of a license that has certain legal provisions to it, including the fact that we cannot properly give out a license to all of the information without having proper notice. You wouldn't be able to buy a product without having some sort of knowledge of what you're buying. The contract would be invalid. Same thing here. If we are transacting for my information, I have to have sufficient information to know that you're collecting it and what you're going to do with it. Are you going to sell it? What's the repercussion here? And that's what I'm advocating here.
When the lights are out and you stumble in the dark, you kept pushing on, but then you went too far. When your ship has sailed and all your dreams are lost, everything is wrong, you feel like it's your fault.